Morning and welcome to day 2 of Wider Local Studies for 2024. My name is Ellen Forsyth and I work at the State Library of New South Wales in Public Library Services. Wider Local Studies has been planned by library staff in different states and territories, and this seminar would not be possible without a lot of cooperation. This session is recorded and will be made available online. Your participation in this is your agreement to be recorded. The text in chat is part of these recordings. I acknowledge that this webinar is hosted from the lands of the Wangal people of the Eora Nation. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you all are today and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this webinar. I pay my respects to elders past and present and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of Australia. In chat, please include your library name and the name of the traditional custodians of the land you're on. This session actually follows on from kind of a part 1 last year with PJ Andrews and Catherine Johnson of Libraries and Archives Northern Territory. But it's really exciting that we have Tui Raven, Senior Manager Indigenous Programs, Deakin University, and author of First Nations Collection Description Guidelines for the library sector, here with us today. I'm really looking forward to hearing from Tui. And we have Glenn Wells, Specialist Librarian, Catalogue Standards and Digital Curation, State Library of New South Wales, stepping in at short notice. Really pleased to have you here too, Glenn. So I'll hand over now to Glenn and Tui. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yep, there's Glenn. I'll just share my screen. And thanks very much, Glenn, for stepping in at the shortest of notice.
Hopefully I won't let you down.
I'm sure you'll do fine. So the reason why we've had to call Glenn in at short notice is a colleague was unwell today. So Glenn was actually quite instrumental in the guidelines project. I think without Glenn, I probably wouldn't have been able to understand what metadata is in general. And I know I wrote the guidelines, but I do come from a space that's about an Indigenous person who works in this space and understands the complexities of actually trying to access information in relation to us. So the guidelines have been written for the library and archive sector. I am currently working on a way to translate it to the glamour sector. I will be publishing something under Creative Commons, which just looks at trying to translate Mark 21 to Dublin Core and any other metadata standards that might be used across the sector. The reason I'm doing it under Creative Commons is I no doubt have lots of mistakes in there and we will need to fix it. So it'll be a joint effort. So I'm coming from Wadawurrung country. I pay respects to elders past, present and emerging, and also from the countries where you're all located, I also pay my respects. I honour Wadawurrung's custodianship of country for thousands of years of rich cultural heritage and their ongoing care and stewardship of country. I acknowledge the wisdom and knowledge passed down through the generations and commit to listening, learning and working collaboratively towards truth-telling, respect and justice for Wadawurrung. Also, just a note, obviously all Aboriginal, Torres Strait and Islander country was never ceded. And just in relation to my work with Wadawurrung traditional owners, I actually do work quite closely with them, not on a full-time basis, but actually I'm covering collections at Deakin and working on things like language culture revitalisation. So I really do believe that librarians and anyone working in the library sector who has a collection related to traditional owners can work quite closely in trying to uncover what these materials look like. So the guidelines, for those who haven't had a look at it, it's basically, it's premised on a couple of international and national guidelines. So obviously UNDRIP, in particular Article 31, which recognises the rights of Indigenous people to maintain, control, protect and develop ICIP, or Indigenous culture and intellectual property. It also acknowledges the need for effective measures to be taken to protect these rights. The Attilan protocols, particularly in relation to intellectual property, description and classification. The Tandonia Declaration, which recognises and supports the themes and commitments for immediate action as set out by the International Council of Archives Experts, Matters Indigenous Group, so the Tandonia Declaration has a couple of different areas. Knowledge authorities, sorry, excuse me, my notes. Knowledge authorities, property and ownership, recognition and identity, research, access and self-determination. I'd also like to mention, which hasn't been put in the background section of the guidelines, but the OCLC's Reimagining Descriptive Workflows, a community-informed agenda for reparative and inclusive descriptive practice. They are linked in the guidelines, but in the resource section, as a very important piece of work. I don't think that the guidelines would have been able to get off the ground without this other international work that's been going on. So the guidelines are premised on being systems agnostic and based on anti-racist and reparative description practices. You need to understand what Indigenous culture and intellectual property is, cultural protocols and cultural heritage terminology. So when we talk about ICIP, or some people say IKIP, we're talking about traditional knowledge, traditional culture expression, genetic resources, secret, sacred and sensitive information, and cultural landscapes. Cultural landscapes can be a bit difficult for people who might have grown up in an era, and I'll give an example of it. Someone came to me once and said, could I actually, just by looking at, know what a sacred site is? And I sort of described to them that this idea of just having one location might seem foreign when you look at it as a full landscape. So Songlines is a really great example of a cultural landscape. It includes a whole bunch of things that may also include traditional knowledge. So it may include how to use particular materials from the area, also may involve traditional cultural expressions. So where ceremony occurs within a particular area. So that is a slightly different area that it may not come in description practices, but you may well do it in a geographical data field. Might be a good place to sort of describe that. Cultural heritage terminology. A lot of this has been included for people that don't work in the sector, aren't librarians, might be working with traditional owners, and it includes things like what is a collection. So it's described a couple of different types of collections. Cultural heritage, which is the tangible and intangible, which relates to, so a traditional cultural expression might be what's an intangible cultural heritage, but it becomes tangible if you record it. So the material object becomes the tangible bit for it. Provenance and ownership, those sorts of things can be quite difficult for someone who works in the space and considers provenance and ownership only in a librarian sector, so only under the copyright and IP legislation that's currently available, so intellectual property. So trying to think about provenance and ownership in a more holistic manner that considers Indigenous people's knowledges. And then repatriation or restitution, archival returns, digital repatriation, and secret, sacred and private materials. Sorry, I've lost myself and I can't get to my next slide. There we go. Too many things on my screen. Just a quick link to the guidelines documents there. So the document is actually published by eDeposit, so it's available on Trove. And there's also 7 training videos, and they're very loosely called training videos. It's just another way to read the guidelines that might be easier for you to understand. So it's a really good resource for working with community members. If you want to do a project that explains that you might be using the guidelines, may not be using the guidelines at all, may just want to update description practices. It's a really great resource to actually just have available if you want to show information that isn't a huge document. So I thought I might just move into a couple of questions in relation to a couple of different areas. I thought my first question would be to Glenn. How did you get involved in this in the description project?
Thanks, Tui. I got involved. Well, there was another librarian, Robert Denninger, who was at the library, who was involved, and he had some conflicts, and it was handed over to me. But I suppose before that, I was, as everyone really at the State Library, were encouraged to complete the culturally safe libraries modules that I think that was a NASLA initiative. So there was a lot of, that was around 2020. So from around 2020, I think there was a lot of, there was a push generally at I suppose libraries and cultural institutions in general to focus more on effectively reparative description.
Yeah, great. Honestly, when I was saying before about how I wouldn't have been able to do this project without you, I completely meant it. Your ability to describe metadata to me in a way which metadata can be very confusing. I thought maybe you can give me some examples of understanding how material may be described considering ICIP. So what I mean by that is ICIP, or Indigenous Culture and Intellectual Property, can be described in a number of ways. You can look at it as language. You can describe it for as being song or dance, or any documentation related to Indigenous people's heritage. So maybe if you've got some examples, or just explain how you work with the collections at the State Library to determine what you might want to describe.
Okay. Well, there's a number of, I suppose, a number of ways of looking at that. There's the question of grouping materials together, and that's happened. I know that that's happened at our institution, and it's happening at a lot of institutions. So, for example, material that was grouped together in the Rediscovering Indigenous Languages project. And so, if you go into our website and search for that, materials that were that had varying provenance are sort of captured underneath that one umbrella. Then you have slightly more problematic collections of material where material in cataloging drives and what have you sort of grouped together under. So, for example, these are posters about Indigenous people, but they're published materials that actually don't really have any relationship with one another. So you can have relatively sensible collections and collections that are sort of almost a little problematic. From the perspective of cataloging, because I suppose you've got to take into account there's the acquisition of material, and that might be, and you might, and that could be quite deliberate. We're acquiring this material because it concerns First Nations people, and then the cataloging of it may have a different priority. And so from a cataloging perspective, we've sort of focused not so much on grouping them together at the moment, at least, but more on trying to highlight aspects of each particular catalog collection item or collection of records. So looking at biographical information, traumatic historical events, highlighting that through subjects or through metadata in general. Agency is a big thing as well. So that's one of the things that AIS subject headings, for example, has been really useful for, because we've got at the State Library, we've got a lot of pictures, a lot of photographs, and it's very difficult to highlight, oh, there's a person in this that is, there's an Indigenous person in this photograph that's, doing something, as opposed to this is an Aboriginal Australian photograph, which can be too broad to be useful. So agency is something that we look at. Obviously, I don't know if I mentioned ceremony, and I suppose getting onto agency, we look at king plates as well. Sorry, I'm just jumping all over the place because I wasn't prepared. So
that's fine.
Thank you. But yeah, so it's, I suppose we look at the reasons for why it's been acquired, but then also within the item itself, we're looking at things that we can illuminate to make it more discoverable from the perspective of from a First Nations perspective.
Yeah. I think your comment about agency is really important, and it's not something I wrote in the guidelines, and I wish I had have. what I think is interesting about it, and I wonder if you can give me an example related to the IATSIS thesaurus, about how the subject headings are actually quite different in the IATSIS thesaurus in comparison to, say, Library of Congress subject headings, and why that question of agency and the way that we as Indigenous people represent ourselves, why it's important to include the IATSIS thesaurus.
Sure, I'll try and find an example that I can bring up. Just bear with me a second.
That's okay. I think for me, when I realized the difference between the Library of Congress subject headings and the IATSIS thesaurus was the concept of hunting. That really sort of embedded it for me about how the practices are quite different. And so the way that you would imagine it under a Library of Congress subject heading as a description practice is actually quite different to the way Indigenous people see it. I haven't got an example, I'm sorry, but when I saw the example when I was at IATSIS doing the research, I was like, oh, that's really interesting. I hadn't really thought of those things that we consider to be universal, which they are, but we hunt differently. You know, it's a very different practice. You know, it's not I'm going to use a very generalized phrasing here, and my apologies, but it's not the lone male hunter going out and, you know, slaying something. It's a group practice relating to traditional foods and all that other stuff. So that's what I mean by the agency and the way that the subject headings are actually contain different information as opposed to Library of Congress subject headings.
Okay, sorry, I'm a bit slow on the uptake here.
That's fine.
So thanks for your patience.
While you're finding that, I might get you to consider something else. When writing the guidelines project, the good thing about it was that I knew that this work was already occurring within the sector. And so that's what made writing the guidelines easier, because I was like, people are definitely doing this work already. Has it changed your practice, or has it just made it stronger? I mean, because there's some places where they've had to completely change practice, but the State Library already has a very strong Indigenous engagement section, and you were already doing some of the work. But has it altered any of your practice in any way?
That's a good question. It's a good question because there's, I suppose we're thinking about things that aren't necessarily written down. So I know that when I first started cataloging, just as an example, you know, we acquired, I think it was a French book, and it had some illustrations of Indigenous Australians in the book. And so we acquired it for that reason. And then when I went to catalog it, I was corrected on my cataloging because I had emphasized the reason essentially that we purchased the item, because it wasn't objective enough. Objective in the sense that the book itself wasn't about Aboriginal Australians. And so, yeah, I think that this whole process has enabled essentially a more critical cataloging. So enabled catalogers to make a decision to put in you know, a sensible AIATSIS or Library of Congress subject heading to emphasize that this material has within it stuff that's topical from a First Nations perspective that wouldn't otherwise be applied if we were being completely objective about our cataloging. So in that sense, yes, it has changed. But having said that, you'll be hard pressed to find that written down anywhere. So let me just get over the next hassle of trying to figure out how. Oh, I cannot share my screen because I'm a participant.
Okay.
You cannot share. Oh, no, because you're sharing your screen.
I'll stop sharing, and then you should be able to share.
Okay. Okay. So, oh, this will be fun.
Down the bottom, green arrow.
Yeah. I think under any other circumstances, it would be really straightforward, but here we are. So now I'm just sharing. Oh, am I sharing?
Yes, you are.
Done it. Wow. Okay. This one is a bit off topic, but I've shared this one because at the moment, we're still having a So essentially, I've shared this because it has these labels. So this is a good example in terms of the usefulness of AIATS as subject headings in particular, because this is a welcome to country. It's a book about welcome to country, happy days, but it's difficult to figure out how to very efficiently describe that using Library of Congress subject headings. It's not necessarily the case that Library subject headings are wrong. They're just not implicitly about First Nations, Indigenous Australians, whereas AIATS subject headings are. I'm not quite sure about the intercultural communication heading, but regardless, the application of an AIATS subject heading here is just incredibly useful. It just tells you straight away what this thing is, and also within our current discovery layer, we're able to apply this second label to differentiate that this is a AIATS subject heading, and you can see it's also got a language heading applied as well, which is also super useful. So that's coming. Yeah.
I really like that you can do the First Nations subjects AIATS as a, like, actually bold that and put it in. Is that something that other libraries can do?
Yes, I know that there's some other Primo or Alma-based libraries that are doing that. I think even if things may have changed in the last couple of months, but I know that even in Mura, there's not that facility to differentiate between the Library of Congress subject headings and the AIATS subject headings. So it's kind of the luck of the draw a little bit with your discovery layer.
Yeah.
Having said that, if I find sorry, I've got this box up here that's kind of in the way. So this is maybe not the best example, but it's one that I came up with in my mad panic just now. So this is coming from our archival system. And at the moment, so you can see occupations domestic, oh, press the wrong button, occupations domestic. So if we look in this picture, there's Indigenous person here.
Yeah.
And so that would normally just be photographs, Aboriginal Australians photographs. So what we're able to do is go occupations, domestic servants. You know, it's not ideal, but at the very least, it emphasizes agency, and it's another way of highlighting that material. It may not, and I suppose in this instance, it's not as powerful, I suppose, as it would otherwise be. If it would make a lot more sense if it were under that label, First Nation subjects, because this is an AIATS subject heading, so it is actually implicitly about Indigenous Australians, even if it doesn't necessarily say that in the faceted heading itself. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does make sense, because we've got the same problem where you can't differentiate the difference between a Library of Congress subject heading or an AIATS one, and it does, and it's actually really nice to call them out so you can actually see the difference. What it does is you look at it and you go, oh, that's not Library of Congress, and then you search what the Library of Congress one is, and you go, I can see why that's probably not applicable, and why you put the other one in there.
In good news, in our system, we've actually changed the way we, in our back end, we've changed the way we show that information in our system, because what we found was that, not to get too technical, but it wasn't the reason it wasn't displaying was because the discovery layer wasn't able to make a second class call to the way that we'd set up the heading. And so I'll take that browser off. And so we're now putting the source in the actual catalogue record itself, which, and I'm told it's in the pipeline, apparently it's going to happen very soon. So you can see source AI access now. So
Oh,
that
nice.
will now trigger the discovery layer to display it under that label. Yeah, that's with the developers. I'm not quite sure when that's going to happen, but hopefully it will happen quite soon.
I've got a bit of a curly question for you, and if you can't answer it, that's fine. It's just in relation to how we move forward in the digital age. So what do you think might be some of the, two things, linked data and how we do the translation to linked data and what that means for Indigenous knowledges, and then AI is the biggest one. So what do you see as, I guess, challenges in description practices in relation to describing Indigenous materials moving into the next sort of, 20 to 50 years, if you've thought about it? And I'm sure you have, Glenn. Sorry to put you on the spot.
Yeah, linked data. Well, I suppose, I mean, we've linked data. I'm immediately thinking of RDA, and that's sort of, yeah, more about, so at the State Library, we sort of jump between, as I imagine this is, and I imagine this is the case at many libraries, we jump between a lot of description standards. And so ostensibly for the archival space, we're using ISAD and then DAX, which is used by the American Society of Archivists. On the other side, on the bibliographic side, we're using RDA. And RDA, the toolkit, has had a few iterations, and at the moment, the toolkit it's been, at one point it was designed, it was born out of AACR 2, which was a description standard that was really focused on card catalogs. Basically, it was sort of a using how do we put a card catalog onto a computer, and RDA at one point borrowed the most important parts of AACR 2 and carried on from that. But now RDA is a lot more focused really on less library environments and less on that card catalog model and more on essentially linked data. The problem, I suppose, with that is that from a cataloger's point of view, it's not the best for your workflow. And so there's a lot of catalogers who actually struggle a lot to use the RDA toolkit. And so I know I'm raving on a bit here, but I suppose fundamentally, I think there probably needs to be a little bit more consolidation of the standards that are being used so that linked data and workflows work better, so that linked data can be applied more reliably. I don't know if I'm making sense there. From an archival point of view, it's another question. There is crossover between those RDA and DAX, but in the archival world, things tend to be a lot more free text because you tend to be describing things that are quite unique. So outside of subject headings and outside of authority headings, it's an interesting question about how you could really apply linked data in an archival setting. I don't know if I've answered your question.
I'm just going to jump in now briefly, Glenn, because I think Tui's got some challenges with her internet connection. I'm finding this really interesting, and I'm thinking there's some very practical applications for public libraries to consider in this, particularly around things like their oral history recordings. for how they're describing it, but also photographs in their collections as well. Yeah, I suppose, do you have any comments around potentially oral history cataloguing to make sure, particularly the use of the AATSIS headings? I think encouraging public libraries to see if they can consider those.
So that's directed, sorry, I didn't realize that's for me.
Yes.
Um,
So I was really thinking about oral history recordings and the use of the AATSIS thesauri as part of the description for them.
well, I mean, I imagine it would almost be a more straightforward process with oral history recordings because, I mean, they would, I mean, more often than not, I imagine that they'd be very deliberately focused on First Nations people. You know, that's why I imagine that there's a lot of projects out there. Yeah, you definitely wouldn't have the conundrum of, oh, should I be applying these headings in that instance? So I think maybe one of the biggest questions is, should I be applying the headings? So I think definitely with a lot of large scale sort of, well, not large scale, but very deliberate focused projects, it's almost easier to describe those.
It saves, but yeah, yes, I do hear your point. And also if people are, say, re-looking at some of the cataloguing of their photographs from the past, that, like the example showing the domestic worker that may have been described or actually or viewed as invisible under previous cataloguing, now becomes heightens the awareness of the little girl sitting down in the grass beside the table. So there could be a place for people to re-look at some of their cataloguing in the past, potentially.
Yeah, definitely. And I think as well, with regard to place names, and so that could be things that you know, to that end, you could be putting that in a subject heading, in a geographic heading, I suppose. Again, an AATSIS heading, but also just in your free text fields in your metadata somewhere in the record. It is incredibly valuable if that's available to you.
Thank you, Glenn. I'll hand back over to Tui now.
Thanks. Let's hope I actually, can you hear me, Glenn?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, good. Sorry, I can't see anyone's faces. Everything's frozen for me. The question I wanted to ask is, if we could evolve the guidelines for another iteration, what would we do? What are the things that we probably missed, we could probably do more of?
That's a solid question. I think one of the questions that not so much I'm asked, but I notice this it gets asked is, are we allowed to? So I think that there's a hesitance to make a mistake. So I think that, and it's definitely something that you know, I struggle with as well. So I think that you're focusing on getting everyone involved, and if you make a mistake, that's okay. But it's better to give it a shot, to use it, and it's probably better. It's something. I mean, I'm sure that there's some bad examples out there, but it's probably better to apply a heading that's not the best. It's a little bit imperfect, but nonetheless makes it discoverable so that it can be corrected by someone else down the line. I don't know. I can't necessarily say that the guidelines don't emphasize that, but I think that that is one of the things that I notice people preoccupied with, just feeling as though they're not the right people to be applying the headings, or not, they're not the right people to be considering reparative description.
Yeah, I hear exactly what you're saying, and I didn't do that in the guidelines, and I, you know, regrettably, actually, it's probably something that probably just needs to be stated. Like, please make a mistake. There are really important ways that you can. I say important ways. There are ways that you can make educated mistakes. So, as an example, I was at the AATSA Summit last week and talking about making everything online and freely accessible, and what happens if you don't know where the materials are from. The best example is to look at the National Archives of Australia guide on what may potentially be in the descriptions about what you probably shouldn't show, and then make an educated guess. It's probably the best way to go about it.
Yeah, I think definitely it's an area where we're making our money, so to speak, because we are professionals. We're information professionals. So there's people often joke about cataloguers' discretion, and it's kind of thrown into standards where they can't quite figure out how best to describe something, and so they'll just go, "Oh, cataloguer's discretion." But yeah, this is a thing where we have to use our discretion, and we have to make informed decisions. And yeah, definitely, if you're working in a cultural institution, you need to make the effort to understand the issues involved, and put in a little bit, be prepared to put in a little bit of extra effort when you're describing this kind of material.
I just got one more question in relation to, I think we're really lucky in the library sector in that we do have the use of subject headings. And there are other platforms, other collection management systems that do have the ability to include subject headings, whether that's the IATSA Thesaurus or Library of Congress subject headings. What would you say to a collecting institution that perhaps doesn't have the ability to add all of the subject headings? How are they going to go about enriching their metadata if they don't have the ability to do that?
Yeah, that's a broad question. Well, I suppose, yeah. I suppose you're imagining a bespoke system. It's a difficult one, because I mean, personally, I feel as though we've disagreed on this at points. I find it problematic when I can see a reason for why local history society or a small museum or what have you would want to have its own thesaurus, have its own controlled terms that it uses in records. But from my perspective, I see that as problematic, because you first off, it's not efficient, but also you're potentially just getting into areas where you're using terms that maybe have been debated over, and so I suppose what I would say is to avoid doing that and look at the resources that are already there. And even if you're not in a position to apply AATSA subjects in a controlled way, you could still use the language in the headings in your records. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's actually a good piece of advice, because you could still create that kind of vocabulary based on other people's practice.
Yeah. And so, yeah, that's essentially it.
Yeah. I guess the other point I like to make is even without that, you can still include ways within the metadata, like under, in about the author or the person who's created it, or in other areas, I guess, if you can't use the controlled vocabularies.
Definitely. I suppose we're talking about hypotheticals, and I'd have to see the system, but yeah, I know that we at the State Library, we have potentially we have this ongoing problem where we're sort of we have so many different systems, or as a certain number of systems, that we try to do our best to not duplicate resources. So and an outcome of that is that in an archival system, we don't extrapolate our authorities as much as we would if it were the only system that we were using. We tend to do that in the bibliographic system, and there are things that typically you'll be putting into an authority heading in an archival system, whereas we're not doing that. So I think every institution has struggles with what they want to do and what they want to the best way of making things discoverable, and also just dealing with the systems that they have. So it's part of the game, unfortunately.
It's very interesting hearing your comments about various smaller organisations having their own systems. I read a report recently where a library was looking at working out their own reparative cataloguing system. And it's really, they don't need to invent it. They can use AATSIS, Thesauri, and other existing practices. It's really maybe heightening libraries' awareness of what's already in place. That seems to be what I'm hearing a bit coming through here, that there's a greater awareness of the resources that are already there. Would that be correct?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the wonderful things about CHUI's guidelines. It's got a very beefy, is it an appendix, with yeah, lots of places to get in, to lots of resources to read.
And so it sounds like taking action is critical. One of the libraries has commented in chat that they've actually changed their subject heading from folklore, lore and fairy tales to religion after reading the guidelines. So there may be a few other libraries that need to look at what they have listed in folklore as well. But I'm also hearing that it's better to make an informed decision and really think about the change rather than be, I suppose, paralyzed by, I'm going to get it wrong. Rather, it sounds like it's more embrace it. I'm going to get it wrong at some point, but I will be thoughtful about how I do this, and I will be open to changing it again when I am more informed, get feedback, etc. Is that kind of the vibe? Am I getting the right vibe here, I suppose?
Yes, yeah. And
yeah, most definitely.
Everyone's got work to do. I know that you know, at the State Library we've got a lot of work to do. You know, we've there's in all our systems, there's, you know, loads of catalogue records that were produced for all the best reasons by really good people who are doing who are focused and doing a great job, but they were, you know, in catalogue drives where perhaps the description wasn't as good as it could be. And so there's a big challenge in going back and making sure that those are cleaned up. And I have to say that, you know, I was going through my own notes the other day, and there was a record that I had used in PowerPoint. Says, you know, this is how this record should display. But I all I'd done is used it in the PowerPoint. I hadn't actually gone back and actually corrected the record. So, so we've all got work to do, you know.
I just noticed a question from Denise Cook in relation to the use of Library of Congress and subject headings and the IATSIS subject headings. I guess in relation to that, it depends on the need. So the reason why you might use the subject heading and why libraries use it is so we can actually see how it fits within the rest of our collection. And not only the rest of our collection, how does it fit worldwide? And so that's the advantage of for libraries, in that it has a better way to actually put that material within the rest of it, which is why I sometimes say, when I say that collection descriptions within galleries and museums are poor, what I'm really saying is they don't generally use subject headings, which means they don't have a better understanding about how the materials all fit with each other within the collection. So it's a needs basis. If you've got a smaller collection and it's something that you can do with it, I definitely suggest it, because what it does do is go, oh, if I've put something within this subject heading with using the Aiatsis thesauri, if I get on to then looking at the Aiatsis catalogue through Mura, I can actually see how it fits with that collection. So if I was going to move to a space of linked data, I could see exactly how that fits within a collection in Australia. So that would be a yes, but if you don't have the resources, then don't do it. It's that simple. It can be labor intensive. So in relation to Denise's question, it depends the purpose of it. Probably for research and looking at larger collections, absolutely. Do you want to jump in, Glenn?
Yeah, I think you've got to look at what these things are, and library LCSH, it's a classification method, and so if you're finding that you're applying headings and you're just getting orphaned headings, so to speak, then it's not useful. If it's the case that your collection is so discrete that any kind of like LCSH that you apply will be like the only one that's applied in the whole collection, then it's probably not a useful way of it's not serving you any purpose.
Really, the actions people need to take from hearing this is A, go and look at the actual guidelines and have a talk within their libraries around how they're looking at organising material, including First Nations people. And take an action rather than be paralysed by, I'm going to stuff up. Would that be a correct way of viewing it?
Yes, yeah.
That sounds good. Now we're going to wrap up a little bit earlier for this session because we've had, how would an Aiatsis subject heading look in a catalogue record in a public library? Is there a specific MARC record? I think this might be a question for Glenn.
Yeah, so what you want to do is, give me a second, I'll go through the hell of sharing my screen again. Well, hell for everybody else. But yeah, it's a 650. So assuming it's a Aiatsis S, it's a 650 with a 7 indicator and then a $2 to indicate the thesauri. Let me just show that in our backend.
And Tara mentioned that she's used them with Spidus as a locally assigned term selection, including Aiatsis in brackets. So it's definitely possible.
Yeah, I suppose in sorry, I'm opening up the wrong window there. It's most LMSs. So for example, with Alma, we've jumped over the problem to some extent because it's now in the community zone in Alma. But originally, we weren't able to put we were able to put the headings, but not the thesaurus as a complete thing in Alma, because we needed to establish that as a completely different thesauri, and we had to go back to Ex Libris to do that. But happily enough, we don't have that problem anymore because it's now in the community zone. But I suppose the point I'm making is that in every system, you're going to have problems that you might have to overcome. So this is, yeah, these are AIATSIS, this is an AIATSIS L heading and this is an AIATSIS S heading. And so how that looks if you wanted to see the dollar signs. For some reason, well, in our ALMA, we put $2 signs. Yeah, so that's 650, 7 indicator to indicate that the thesaurus reference is in the $2, and then that you've got the heading. And you can see that those binoculars are indications that it's in the community zone there, and that's the actual heading itself, or the not the heading, well, yeah, the authority entry for it. Does that answer the question?
I'm guessing so. Thank you. That actually was really helpful, seeing the back end of the catalogue like that. That was terrific. And I think it will help people. I don't know I'm not sure if we've got any cataloguers online today, but it will get people being able to maybe raise the idea with their cataloguing staff if they're not actually cataloguing within local studies as well. There is a question of, do you see this working with other First Nations librarians around the world? But I'm figuring there's a discussion going on there. Yeah, do you see AIATSIS working with Library of Congress, Indigenous headings, or other First Nations librarians around the world?
Well, they already are, in the sense that I think it was a few years ago now that that OCLC at the very least recognized AIATSIS headings. So I think, yeah, that's I mean, I think that's maybe that Chewy's probably better to answer that. It's definitely it's a global thing now.
That sounds terrific. I think Chewy really is having internet problems.
Aren't we all?
Yeah. If it holds out and you can hear me, I think the conversations with OCLC are quite important that are occurring at the moment. And it is an international space.
Yeah, which I think is all the more reason to not feel like you can't get involved. I think because I think when you think, oh, you know, it's an international thing, there's so many different communities to consider. It's a little overwhelming, but I think you know, walking into the problem, well, not that it's a problem, but walking into it's probably the best solution rather than, you know, running away.
Well, leaving these items at the bottom of the pile to be catalogued so that no one has access to them at all, it can be actually a learning opportunity to do some of the cataloguing, have a discussion about it, talk with your local First Nations community as to how it works for them. Like Tui's example of working locally, I think was actually really encouraging. And so that's an encouragement for all of you to try. Now I'm going to look, really, this has been a fabulous session despite internet issues. Thank you so much, Glenn, for stepping in at unbelievably short notice and speaking in such a thoughtful and detailed way to help people with the understanding. Please join me in thanking Tui and Glenn for this session this morning, and please go away and look at the guidelines. Now, this means we're going to have a slightly longer break. I'm just hopefully sharing the break slide, although it's not looking like it's working at present. No, that's not working yet. Oh, Michael's, okay, no, I won't do that. Okay, we'll be back at time zones are 12:50, 12:20 or 10:50. You know which time zone you're in, and we'll see you back then for the 10-minute talks. Big thank you again to both Glenn and Tui for this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to day 2 of the Wider Local Studies seminar. My name's Nicole Hilda. I'm the Heritage Librarian at Hobsons Bay Libraries. I'm on Bunurong land here today on the Kulin Nation. I'll be chairing this session, and we're going to have 7 lightning talks. They range from disaster planning, training new staff to preservation stations. Each talk is going to go for 10 minutes. And like yesterday, so we can get through all the presentations, we ask you to put any questions that you have for presenters into the chat for them to respond to. And presenters, you might also want to put in your contact details in the chat if they're not in your slide. Our first speaker for today is Jeffrey Potter from Central Coast Council. And he's going to be talking on Aboriginal street and place names. So Jeffrey, if you're here, could I just get you to put your video on and take it away? Hi, Jeffrey. You're just on mute, so when you're ready to go.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Ready to go?
Yes.
All right. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Today I'll be talking about Aboriginal street and place names, the Gosford experience. Now, through this brief presentation, I hope to show you how a small book has influenced the ways that Aboriginal words were used for local street and place names, and how this book may have influenced your own area's naming conventions. Next, please. Acknowledgement of country. I begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet and pay my respects to their elders, past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples joining today. Next, please. Early place names. Although home to Aboriginal peoples for many thousands of years, when Europeans came to the New South Wales Central Coast, the geography was too challenging to provide much incentive to settle. Up to 1823, the Central Coast provided a no settlement buffer between the Sydney Cove settlement and the Hunter River convict settlement. In the 1820s, 30s and 40s, early surveyors mapped the area, and many Aboriginal place names were fortunately recorded. Unfortunately, many meetings were not well recorded, but we at least have the early names attached to localities. The geography of the Central Coast remains challenging. From the 1836 map you see here, you will gather that many rugged sandstone hills divided lakes and estuaries. Next, please. Isolation leads to name repetition. When settlement occurred, particularly in the former Gosford local government area, it was based around small shipbuilding villages which were located near good stands of timber and water deep enough to launch vessels. The resulting villages were isolated from one another and largely accessible only by water. This isolation led to each village developing a unique character. It also led to the tracks and roads in the vicinity of each village being named in fairly obvious ways. Wharf Road is a good example. In each village, a wharf represented on this slide, there was a wharf road that of course led to the wharf. Simple. Each of these places As I said, represented on the slide, the Yao subdivision, Patonga Estate, Booker Bay Estate, Gosford, all had wharf streets or roads. Other names were given that might be similar to other names in other villages. There was no real problem with name duplication in the times when villages were isolated, but as roads were improved, villages became better connected and street directories were printed, confusion over duplicated names began to manifest itself. Around this time, many new subdivisions were being established and they all needed new street names. Next, please. So what to do? In the late 1960s, Gosford Shire Council decided that it was time to rename many streets in villages around the district and to begin assigning names on a consistent basis to new subdivisions. With this in mind, a council staff member from the town planning section was given the responsibility for identifying and suggesting suitable street names. Some names were drawn from those of prominent European settler families in each locality. Other names came from a source that I will now describe. Eventually, a list of the approved names was published in the Government Gazette. Next, please. So where do the Aboriginal terms come from that are used? While Aboriginal word lists specific to particular tribal groups had long been compiled and published in various scientific journals, these probably remained largely unknown to most early 20th century white Australians. In 1924, a little book, Australian Aboriginal Native Words and Their Meanings, compiled by Sydney Endicott, was first published in Melbourne. Over time, several editions of this book were published, with later versions having a descriptive blurb added to the cover, which reads, "A choice of 3,000 pleasant-sounding words from which to choose an appropriate Australian name." He claimed no special knowledge of Aboriginal culture or vocabularies. Words were chosen that ran trippingly off the tongue, and these were drawn from a wide range of largely unrecorded sources in old books, newspapers, etc. It is believed that the words come from all mainland states, but establishing just where they originated would be a major study in its own right. To his credit, Endicott in his foreword did point out the need to cultivate and maintain an Australian atmosphere over all our lives and doings, and so counter the apparently growing conviction that we are just a sort of suburb of New York or Paris or even London. Next, please. A small book with a big impact. At the time of its release in 1924, Endicott's book was probably unique. It gave everyday Australians a selection of Australian words and a supposed meaning. The general public and state and local governments were quick to recognise the utility of such a publication. That this book was a great hit with local councils across Australia is unquestionable. On this slide is a Google Earth image of Coomba Park near Tuncurry on the north coast of New South Wales, well outside our area. And most of the street names on that Google Earth slide, they're taken straight from the 1924 book by Endicott. This is repeated in many parts of Australia, although many of the words appear to be from the mainland. Even streets in subdivisions in Tasmania have used Endicott's terms. At Gosford, we appear to have been late adopters of Endicott's work. Next, please. So here we'll have a look at a slide that shows some of the impact of this little book. Although we cannot categorically state that all instances of the same words being used across Australia are entirely due to Endicott, there is a strong circumstantial case. This slide gives a picture of just how one word or one term, Karinya, which means happy, healthy home, I think it is, came to be used all over Australia in a multitude of places and situations. Add to that the adoption of words from Endicott as business or institutional names, and the legacy of the book becomes quite apparent. Next, please. So some pros and cons. First, the cons. A subtitle, a choice of 2,000 pleasant sounding words from which to choose an appropriate Australian name, sounds terribly patronising today. The book reflects a one-size-fits-all approach to Aboriginal words and hides the richness of Australian Aboriginal vocabularies. It can give a wrong impression that street names are based on local terms. This is not an example from Endicott, but it illustrates the types of problem. Rumballara was an Aboriginal term adopted at community recommendation for a bushland reserve in Gosford local government area. It apparently means rainbow in the Yorta Yorta language of the Murray River district. Now, over time, and with the help of social media and the internet, even council officers have come to believe that this is a local Central Coast Aboriginal term. So it causes a lot of confusion, unfortunately, these sorts of word lists. While drawn from across Australia, the use of words from Endicott and similar works result in endless repetition across Australia. So you saw that other slide with Carinya, and you saw just how many communities have adopted Carinya for its streets and for its businesses and all sorts of things. So we're getting the same terms repeated over and over. Now, use of more suitable local words may be blocked out by use of generic terms. Once a street or a place or a park is named, that name is only going to change under exceptional circumstances. So to some extent, you are bound to continue with that term, however right or wrong it is. Without background as to sources, the accuracy and origin of the words in Endicott's book could be highly questionable. The book itself and the uses it's put to, they're a very selective appropriation of Aboriginal language for non-traditional purposes. There is a possibility that some terms used could be secret, offensive, or just wrong. And it highlights a romanticised and idealised version of Aboriginal and broader Australian life. Now, the pros, at least this book encourages use of Aboriginal words, and the use of Aboriginal terms is a form of acknowledgement that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Next, please. Various editions of Australian Aboriginal words and their meanings by Sydney J. Endicott are available online through the State Library of Victoria, the Internet Archive or the Wayback Machine and other sites. Now, other Aboriginal word lists likely to be used in similar ways to Endicott include H.M. Cooper's Australian Aboriginal Words, 2,000 examples and their meanings, which is available online, and A.W. Reid's Aboriginal Words and Place Names of Australia. Next, please. Thank you for your attention. I hope you found this presentation of interest. You might like to look at the Aboriginal street names in your area and look at Endicott, because I'm not a betting man, but I would bet you that at least a few are drawn from Endicott's humble 1924 publication. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Jeffrey. We've got Tara Eagleton presenting next. Her topic's called Moving Memory, and she's from Liverpool City Library in New South Wales. Thanks, Tara.
Hi, thanks, Nicole. Yes, so this presentation is relocating a local studies collection. And the next slide should say, don't do it. But the fact is we did do it. No, it doesn't say that. We are going to move the collection, and so may you. So I'll continue. And there are some good opportunities and some advantages to gain from relocating a local studies collection. In our situation, we were moving to a new building. So just to note as well, this is not a how-to guide, but more of our experience of the process. Next slide. So we are located in Liverpool, New South Wales, about 38 kilometres southwest of Sydney, on the land of the Gadigal people of the Darug Nation. Liverpool has a main CBD library and 5 branches. The library you can see on the left was our George Street location. This opened in 1986, so the majority of the heritage collection has been housed in this building for 37 years. Last year in December 2023, our new library opened on the right, which is a purpose-built library building called Yellamundi, which is Darug for storyteller. Next slide. So previous to the move, our heritage collection was stored in 3 locations. The library housed collections in a climate-controlled archives room, a basement under the building, and also our office workroom area, which housed our photographic collection in 5 large filing cabinets. There were also lots of items in this area in various stages of processing, boxes of catalogued material, and some donations. We also have a regional museum that stores a lot of the objects, including museum props. And there is also a shipping container which stores very large items like fridges, swimming pool turnstiles, printing press, roller machines. We were only moving those collections that were in the library. The next slide. So as the timeline shows, we began planning in mid-August, and the opening date for the new library was December the 3rd. So we had around 3 months to plan, pack, and move. And just a bit of a background on my role during this time. So I started at Liverpool Library on July 31st. As the team leader of local studies, and we had a local studies officer who also left in August. So I was new to the library, new to the collection, and we started this process a few weeks after coming on board. So it was definitely learning to swim very fast. Also during this time, we were moving our office from the library to a new council building, which was going to be separate from the library. So a couple of moves going on in this period. Okay, so next slide. So the planning stage, to start with, I just performed a quick evaluation and overview of the collection, the types of formats that we hold, and try to prioritize for packing the most fragile of materials, and to work out an inventory for the collection so we could better track and allocate storage space in the new area. Lots of measuring going on. There was limited access to the site, so we were relying on design specifications for the furniture and room plans. And thankfully, someone had previously recorded the measurements for our old library space. So during surveying the collection, I found the shelving and storage arrangements in our old library was not recorded in our LMS system. So this meant we could create a new shelving plan for the new space. So sort of eliminated having to really track old shelf to new shelf. There were lots of downloading of lists during this time, and purchasing of archival supplies to pack and rehouse the materials and perform some basic preservation and protection. Okay, next slide. So this is photos of our old space. We had big art racks. As you can see, there's quite a lot of room, a mezzanine level above the room, and we're sort of looking at 660 metres of space in the old library. Next slide. And this is our new space. So much less, 360 metres squared. So we really had to think about how we were going to fit everything into this area. The rehousing of the different materials into boxes was a big space saver. So, you know, small items that might have been in large boxes, we went and found appropriate sizes, and this really did help to put everything into the new space. Next slide. So the packing and moving, we packed most everything ourselves, and this was for concern about the handling and losing of any items in the move. And looking back, I'm happy we did, as I definitely believe items would have been lost or damaged. So this was a good thing to do. It also gave us an opportunity to stock take some of the collections and take notes on any damage or preservation issues as we went. We did get 2 casual staff on board to help with some procedures written up on how to preserve, rehouse, pack everything. There was a lot of backlog of uncatalogued items. They were just rehoused, labelled for future cataloguing. Lots of labelling on boxes. There was a little impact to other areas. We tried not to take any acquisitions at this time or collection development activities, but we continue to allow access to some of the materials and take research inquiries if possible. There was also, the removalists were not specialised in handling the historical materials, so we also had to provide guidance to them on how to sort of handle different materials and monitor the packing and unpacking. Next slide, please. Oh, I should add the sticker there, "What's this, Cheryl?" That appeared absolutely everywhere. Yes, Cheryl worked here many years ago. So I found that all over the office, and I still don't have an answer to some of that. Okay, next slide. As I said, we did have a basement area as well. We actually packed this up after the opening of the new library. A lot of this area had museum props. Some of the materials did have quite a lot of mold, so they had to be discarded, but everything was photograph wrapped, and this went to our offsite storage, and luckily we had that because we really needed that extra space to move this. Okay, next slide. Okay, so some of the challenges, you know, anything can happen. As I said, we had 3 months. The deadline kept sort of moving around. There really wasn't enough time for like detailed planning, so we did the best we could. Lack of access to new location, you know, was difficult to plan where to put things on shelves. There was a big reduction in space, so, you know, really had to sort of play a bit of Tetris when things were unpacked. We also found like the weight limits and shelving depth on our new compactors wasn't quite adequate. So where I thought we had space, we actually didn't. We had to distribute the weight and lose some of that space. So that was something that wasn't anticipated. And of course, you know, even after moving in, we still had a lot of entry by trades fixing our air conditioning And so they were bringing in a bit of dirt, you know, so we had to be careful with that. So recommendations I would make after going through this experience is, if you can participate in the planning of the space before it's designed, measure, and remember to look at the depth and the weight of your items. Obtain a plan of the space. Pre-pack your fragile items. Lots of inventories. It'd be great if you can start that well before the move is happening. Plan B, have some off-site storage. We also had a Dropbox for local studies as the staff were packing up their desks and their cupboards. They had a place to pop things in and start yesterday. So last slide. We are now 6 months on now. And just what I gained out of this, I think packing up everything gave a much broader and deeper knowledge of what is in the collection and a better understanding of the priorities. And we were able to apply that basic preservation as we packed across the whole collection. So even though it's going to take some time getting back to things, everything's much more protected than it was previously. Thank you.
Thanks, Tara. That was a massive job. Well done. Next up, we've got Taylor Coventry, and she's going to be talking about Memory Preservation Station. Hey, Taylor.
Hello.
Taylor's from City of Karratha in Western Australia. Welcome.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here. So, as you said, I'm Taylor and I'm the local history librarian at the City of Karratha. So today I join you from Nulluma country. So we're in the top end of Western Australia, up in the Pilbara, so beautiful red dirt country up here. I'm very pleased to be here today to talk to you about an innovative service we have in our libraries, the Memory Preservation Station. Not only has it been embraced by our community, it has also had a really positive impact on the way we do things in our local history. Next slide, please. So I thought I would start by telling you a bit about the service and how it came about. I've been working in libraries for about 14 years and I've had this idea mulling around in my head for some time. Fast forward to a few years ago when I was a history librarian for the City of Karratha, I was lucky to inherit, amongst other things, an archive full of oral history recordings on cassette tapes, some VHS tapes that had never been watched before, and a lot of photos and documents that were not digitised, or even worse, we were using our budget to send off-site to be digitised. This got me thinking about what we could do to digitise these items and potentially add them to our collections, our catalogue, and make them available to the public. I should also add that before I worked in libraries, I had worked in video production, so I really loved the idea of merging these two careers together. Next slide, please. As part of our state library budget, we are able to apply for a library priority grant, and lucky for us, one of the categories encouraged the addition of new and innovative services for libraries. In 2022, we were looking at what we could apply for the following year. And as fate would have it, I found an article about the Brisbane City Libraries and their new digitisation service. I contacted them and they were very helpful in talking me through the trials and triumphs of their service. We eagerly put together our proposal and submitted it to the State Library. We were fortunate enough to get the grant, and so our Memory Preservation Station journey began. Next slide, please. So a little bit about the service now. So what is the Memory Preservation Station? It is technology and software that allows staff, patrons, and the public to convert redundant technologies to digital formats. We have multiple stations that allow the digitisation of videotapes, photos, cassette tapes, photo film strips and negatives, slides, 3.5-inch floppy disks, documents, camcorder tapes, Super 8 reels, DVDs, CD-ROMs, memory cards, and mini DV and DV cam tapes. We don't have the service set up all the time. We wanted to keep it mobile, so we use laptops and a trolley set up with our tech. We just set up what we need to when a booking is made. And as you can see from the photo, there's some of the items that we have, and there's me with my orange hair. So how much does it cost? It's actually free to use the Memory Preservation Station. Patrons just need to bring in a USB or a portable hard drive with them to save their files. How long does it take? So photos are pretty quick. However, the only drawback is if you're converting a cassette tape or videotape, it takes as long as that does. So if you've got a VHS that takes 3 hours, it's going to take you 3 hours to do it. The reason we have 2 laptops set up is just so patrons can come in if they're converting a VHS tape. We encourage them to bring in photos, documents, and those sorts of things, and sort of do a bit of work on both as they go along. So what skills do you need? So we ask for customers to have basic computer skills or to bring someone in that can help them. We have instructions for everything, and we usually have a staff member go through the station with them before they get to use it by themselves. So the idea is for patrons to learn to use the station on their own. We've printed guides on each station, and we have everything set up waiting for them to arrive. So initially staff will sit with them and get them going, and then they leave. This has worked really well for us because, as you can imagine, we do users who are not that tech savvy. Our main aim, apart from preserving memories, is to empower our community to use the service on their own, which I'm happy to say most people are. We even have some of our seniors coming in once a week to continue to digitise their photo albums and home movies without any help from us now, which is a really great thing to see. We even have one of our seniors who's coming in to help her friends convert VHS tapes as well, which is amazing. Next slide, please. So how do you book a session? So there's a few ways to do it. We have Wednesdays dedicated to booking your own session at our main library in Karratha, where patrons just jump onto our Try Bookings page and book themselves in. We also have a request form that they can fill in to nominate a day and a time, and that's across all of our libraries. Community members are also able to book other session times and dates by emailing us. But most of the time people just come in and want to have a chat anyway, so that's how they book. We do have banners and flyers in our branches, and a lot of the time, a lot of conversations start from those as well. For us, word of mouth has been the biggest advertiser for us now. We don't even really advertise it in traditional ways anymore. People just come in and know what to do and always say, oh, my friend told me all about it. So that's really fabulous for us too. Being where we are up in the Pilbara, we also get tourists in during the colder months to use the service. And word of mouth has spread to other local councils as well. So we have had a few people making special trips from all up around the Pilbara to come use the service as well, which is really fantastic. As far as it goes with terms and conditions with using the service, we do ask people to not bring in anything that's damaged. You would be surprised of the amount of mouldy photos people have bought in. That's a no-no. You do have to own copyright for your items, so home movies is totally fine. Trying to digitise your favourite DVD, not fine. Obviously, no illegal or inappropriate items. We also ask users, let them know, I should say, that your items may be damaged. Unfortunately, we have had a few VHS tapes eat the videos, so that's just one of our terms as well. Next slide, please. So stats and success. So we end up launching the program at our Karratha Library in March 2023. So far we've had over 40 people attending information sessions. We've had over 100 station bookings made, and that's over 250 hours of items digitised. The project has been a great success, and we're still getting around 3 or 4 bookings a week, which is really great for a regional town of about 22,000 people. Most importantly, the service has provided our community with an opportunity to preserve and conserve their precious memories that might have otherwise been lost. We also applied the State Library Board Award for Innovation and Collaboration, and we won. So that was really wonderful to be recognised and a great honour for us as well. Next slide, please. So what about our local history? So when talking about our local history and what we've done, I'm pleased to note that many hours of oral histories in the local history archive have been digitised. These were on CDs and cassettes and are now MP4 files, yay. We are looking at doing a big oral history project this year to get these onto our catalogue and hopefully made available to our public. We are no longer using our photos to be digitised. This gives us greater control of the outputs, and we can then use that budget for other projects as well. As a result, we are adding more items to our digital library catalogue every week. As we are digitising photos in-house, we can also give the donor a copy of their photos on USB, which they love, and this is a real selling point when asking for donations. For example, we'll do all the work and we'll give you a copy. We've also had an increase in in donations just from people using the service. It's amazing how many people don't think their local memories are of interest, but as we know, they certainly are. We've had some wonderful photos and videos donated to us that wouldn't have happened if the patron hadn't made a booking and we hadn't had those conversations. We're currently auditing the archive at the moment and looking at what else we can digitise. We have some older VHS tapes that we are seeking permission for, and we have some historical documents to look at. So there's a lot of work there keeping us very busy. Next slide, please. So lessons learned. It's definitely helps having another library has done a similar project to talk to them. So if you guys are thinking of doing something similar, please get in touch with me. I'm always very happy to talk about it. I'm a big team of one person, so it can be a lot of work. So definitely ensure that you have other people on your journey with you, and train up as many staff as possible on using the station. There's actually someone using the station as we talk right now, so it's good I've got another staff member to help me with that. Old tech is really, really hard to come by. So if digitising VHS tapes, you need VHS players. That was a fun one to try and find. We did put a call out to our community for their old players. We didn't have any luck, so good old eBay helped us out with that one. One of the big things for us, and we know we touched on it with the oral histories yesterday, but being prepared for emotions as well. So sitting with people and them seeing their videos and of people that have passed away or have special memories, that was a bit emotional. It was really great. Yeah, so be prepared for that. If you're thinking of doing something similar, definitely audit your archive before starting. Have a think about what your redundant formats are and what you need. We've been lucky enough to find a solution for most of our things. Microfiche is one that I'm still working on. So if anyone has any recommendations, please let me know. Think about your patrons and their needs. We live in a regional and sometimes remote place. It was important for us for the station to be mobile, so we could take it out to more places. I know other libraries have sort of permanent setups, but that wasn't going to work for us. Also, I just wanted to say, back yourself if you have a great idea mulling around in your head, and try and make it happen. So whether it be applying for a grant or maybe even just trying to sweet talk your manager for a bit more budget. Next slide, please. Cool. So what's the future of the service? So we now have multiple copies of our equipment and we are taking bookings out of 3 of our 4 libraries. We are mobile, so we can take it on the road. We're looking at outreach opportunities, especially to remote areas, or taking it to people that may not be able to come in to see us. We are looking at what else we can add to our service. We recently added video cameras and mini DV tapes, and that's going back to my video production days again. We still have a long way to go, but we're really happy with where we are with it right now. We do hope that we can inspire others to do something very similar as well. We've had some other libraries in Western Australia contact us to do something similar, and I'm always happy to chat about it as we go too. So there's different things you can do with even a very small budget as well. So that's always something to keep in mind. Next slide, please. And my very last slide. So I just wanted to say, if this is inspiring to you guys, if there's something that you'd like to do, please get in contact with me. I'm more than happy to share our process, list everything we bought and those sorts of things. So there's our website, my contact details, and I will also be here for the rest of the seminar and tomorrow. So please get in contact if you have any questions. Thank you all very much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your sessions.
Thanks so much, Taylor. That's brilliant. Congratulations. Next up, we've got Jennifer Munro. Jennifer is from Southern Downs Regional Library in Queensland. Jennifer, if you could pop on your video and I'll hand the floor over to you.
I thought I did have my video on. Sorry.
Sorry, Jennifer, could you turn your volume up a little bit? Thanks.
Sorry, I'm not sure when my video is not on.
That's okay, Jennifer. We can hear you more clearly now. So maybe go ahead, maybe even though we don't get to see you, if you could start your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, great, thanks. Thanks for the intro. I'd just like to acknowledge the Gidabal and Gumbawal custodians of the land on which I'm presenting from in Stanthorpe. So next. Just a little about our library service. We're an independent public library with 3 branches, Warwick, Stanthorpe, Allawarra, and our library branch here in Stanthorpe is our mid-sized branch. In 2020, we purchased cameras and scanners through a grant for digital heritage materials to be used by the library and community groups. As with any small country town library, we operate with minimal staff who have to carry out multiple tasks. So in Stanthorpe, we have the equivalent of 3 full-time staff and 3 casuals, but we are supported by the State Library Queensland, and really we're only limited by our lack of imagination. Next. And now a little bit about our local newspaper. So for almost 150 years, the Stanthorpe Border Post documented the lives of residents and their milestones. Important events were reported on along with the changing landscape. So when in 2020 our local newspaper closed down its office, it was a great loss to the community, resulting in an outcry and grieving. You can see that both the town and the newspaper originated in 1872. So Stanthorpe's identity has always been expressed by and bound to our Border Post. Next. So we received a donation. Coinciding with their last print run, the Stanthorpe Border Post closed their offices in June 2020 when their staff approached our Stanthorpe branch offering to donate newspapers and photographic content. While we didn't have the space for the newspapers, the photographic collection was accepted with the following undertakings. 1, preservation work, 2, digitisation of the material, and 3, upload digitised items, images for accessibility. Next. The preservation work's been ongoing since 2021 to 2024. So why did this preservation stage take so long? The collection was almost dumped into the library with material scattered throughout various boxes. Some items were in order, but the majority was not. It was hard to get a handle on exactly what was in the collection, let alone how to order it. Completing this task was only possible from 2023 to 2024 because our building's been closed for renovations. So we took the opportunity while we were out of our building to afford 6 months part-time work on it. And that's what allowed us to get the whole collection sorted in terms of archival storage. Next. So it's only now in 2024 can we understand the Stanthorpe Border Post collection as a whole, and here it is in photos. All items are ordered chronologically and numbered sequentially, which has all been captured in an Excel inventory. The collection includes 31 years of photojournalism for Stanthorpe and its surrounding regions. There are negatives, thumbnail images, and photos in folders, and proof sheets, negative envelopes, CDs with digital images, and submitted or archival quality photos in boxes. Next. That's quite small to see, I'm sorry about that. But while you can see here that there are currently 45 boxes and 54 folders holding all these items, it is the number of images on negatives and proof sheets and digital images on CDs that is the most telling in terms of the size of the collection. So the potential estimate of images on negatives sits at around 130,000. And the potential estimate of digital images on CDs sits at around 943,000. These are estimates only because we haven't as yet been able to go through all the contents individually, especially the CDs, for which we've only just scratched the surface because our priority has been storage preservation. Next. So some problems have emerged. If we focus on the size and scale of the overall collection, it's too overwhelming for us as a small library. B, because we have limitations of staff time allowed on this task. C, without identification of people and places of items uploaded, they're almost worthless to the community as an archive. Well, that's a bit strong, but because searchability of the collection is seriously reduced. D, how to make the collection accessible. Now that we know the scale of what we're dealing with, we have to consider the approach we take with the collection moving forward. Next. Next, please. Oh, yeah. Oh, no, sorry. Go back to observations. I didn't see it. Thank you. So having now touched each piece of the collection, here are some observations I've made. The donated photographic material increasingly presented itself as the fabric of the community. Each photo or proof sheet representing a fabric square, which when combined with all the others can create a quilt of history of the town and surrounds. With approximately 3,500 proof sheets, you can see we're dealing with something of great complexity, both internally as well as externally. It's not just the size of the collection in total, it's the fragmented nature of the proof sheets themselves. They are not and cannot be ordered via genre or subject or place for any one proof sheet. If you look at the examples on this page, you can see there is a variety of topics, groups, and people on any one page. So they would each have to be sought out individually. But what I have found is that there are recurring topics and events that involve local organisations. For example, every year there's the agricultural show. Next, please. We are therefore formulating a different approach by shifting the focus to community engagement with specific parts of the collection. Large-scale scanning and digitisation simply in order to upload the entire collection does not mean the community will engage with it. Instead, we need to make sense of the individual parts of the collection, the people, the places and events, not one image at a time, but collectively by groups, thereby dipping into the collection one community group at a time. And just so I've put these images from a local quilt from the Stanthorpe Art Gallery on here as well. So we can identify within that large quilt the Catholic Church, the Art Gallery and Library, Storm King Dam and the Post Office, all local places. And they've all been created independently. But we can't see the whole picture yet, but we can distinguish specific parts. So that's sort of, I guess, the stage of where we're at the moment, how to create these small local stories. But how can we make the collection accessible to the community in that? So next, please. So we're working up the idea of identification workshops. We can approach relevant community organisations to hold identification workshops, thereby engaging them in the collection and helping our library service to manage the collection in the long term. Here's a short list of just some potential groups. I've already approached Goondiwindi Regional Council and they're positive about hosting identification workshops in their Texas and Inglewood library branches because the Stanthorpe Border Post also covered Texas and Inglewood. The idea would be to hold similar workshops with organisations, particularly for anniversaries, etc. For example, this year is the 50th anniversary year of the Stanthorpe Rugby League, and we hold 30 years of photographic memory for them. While we can't make copies for them due to copyright restrictions, we can scan the relevant proof sheets and photos, display them, and involve the groups to identify people within them and places. And just a note on the copyright, it is still held by the Stanthorpe Border Post as it is still operating online. So we cannot make copies of any material, but we are able to upload with acknowledgement of their copyright ownership, which they agreed to. Next. Sorry, online accessibility. And then once we have a number of scanned items from the workshops and ID information, we can then work on uploading them to make accessible to the wider public. And we're currently looking at how best to do this. So one option is to use the Spiders archive function. However, we've already found some limitations just by the experimentation we've done there so far. So there are real restrictions of searchability, the updates have interrupted ability to view images, and the size of the cloud storage required is something we're trying to get our heads around with our IT department. we are researching other options with the primary aim of presenting the photos from each workshop as a local story or fabric square. Next, and my last slide. So gradually we'll be working towards a photographic quilt, much as the one you see there, which is a locally made quilt of our community in Stanthorpe. At this point, the individual images or stories become harder to discern. You can't really quite see those individual images I showed you before, but they're in there. But each tells its own story. For example, the Catholic Church is completely central to the strong Italian community since Father Divardi arrived here in 1875. And that's indicative of many local stories that can be told from our region. There's no quick fix for this collection, but I do think it will prove extremely valuable for time to come with local stories we haven't even thought about yet. I'm seeking any advice or feedback to help us formulate our ideas and plans, so I'd be very happy to hear from you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Jennifer. I love the concept of the identification workshop.
Oh, thank you.
So next up, we are going to hear from Helen McDonald, and she is from Sutherland Shire in New South Wales. Helen, can I just get you to put your camera on, please?
Yeah, I think it's on.
Yep, there you are. Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Okay, hi everyone. Just so you have a bit of an idea where we are, the area now known as Sutherland Shire. Just the next slide, please. Sutherland Shire is populated by clans of the Dharawal language group, and it was incorporated in 1906 and is one of the last local government areas in the outlying metropolitan area of Sydney. It's bordered on the east by the Pacific Ocean and the Georges River to the north and Royal National Park to the south. Next slide. The Shire Pictorial newspaper, which is the one I'll be talking about today, was first published in October 1954, and it would have been celebrating its 70th year this year. It was founded by a family and it was circulated through the Sutherland Shire with an Eastern edition from 1954 and a Western edition by 1958. It was sold by the family in 1972, so we only have the run of negatives up to that time. In the 18 years it was published by the family, it started with just a few images, but by 1972 had extended to many, many more. The building where the paper was produced was at the eastern end of the Shire in the suburb of Caringbah. We don't really know anything much about the staff or the photographers, and the building that's seen here was built in 1959 and remained in use until the paper was sold. But they continued to serve as a printing business, so they were still managing the images and after that time. Next slide. So after the change of ownership, as I say, the negatives remained there, but in about 2009, 2010, the Sutherland Shire Historical Society were gifted the collection by the family. But as the society was unable to care for them, the library became the custodian for the collection on site at Sutherland from 2011. So in that time, it was we were working out what to do, and we decided that digitisation would be the best way forward because the negatives were acetate negatives, so they were very much at risk. So we prepared an MOU between the society and the library, and that allowed us to get the project underway. Next slide. At the same time, we actually had done a significance assessment of the local studies collection, and we included the pictorial collection in that assessment just for the purposes of working out what we needed to do. So that was quite telling because obviously the condition of the negatives were identified as at great risk. Next slide. So we decided to work together as a team of 4 staff from 2016 to 2018, working through hardbound volumes of the paper. And we went through page by page and each person was allocated specific years. And that included 1 calendar year and could have both Eastern and Western editions. Some images were repeated across editions as well, particularly advertisements. So that made it a little bit more tricky to make selections. But on the whole, we were selecting from the newspaper images themselves and then following that up by looking for the negatives in the negative boxes. So that sometimes proved that we could find the negative or it may have actually been missing. Next slide. So when we'd actually finished making the selections, we had to go through the negatives. And because of the fact that they were suffering from vinegar syndrome, which is very common with acetate negatives, the smell being quite unpleasant, we were using cotton gloves to handle the negatives. And also the negatives are actually housed in individual boxes. So it was quite a process to go through them all. But we collated all the information as we went into an Excel spreadsheet, including date, page number, etc., to make sure that we were not getting too confused about the images that we were using. And we decided for the file formats for copying that we should do TIFF, JPEG and PDF, because we really felt that we possibly weren't going to be able to go back and do it again. So as it was quite time consuming. So 2 contractors were selected, Pasco Digital and a local photographer were used to capture the images. Next slide. And what we chose was based on obviously items of historical significance, but a number of other things as well. Subjects sometimes had multiple photographs, and if they were taken from various angles and they showed material that was not present in one, we selected that as well. So there might be multiple images of one particular event. And as you can see here, there's a photograph of a pub called Caringbah Inn, and it showed an exterior and an interior shot, which was very rare for our photographic collection. Next slide. We were very cautious with some of the more sensitive content, things like accidents, images of identifiable children, but they may have been selected anyway, depending on the importance of them. Culling was also another issue we had to deal with because some of the images were of everyday products. They photographed those things to put them in the paper. So we didn't bother with that sort of thing, just the unique material. And sometimes the front pages have very little interest of historical interest. And it was interesting also that each staff member brought their own interests and biases into the selection process. So it was good there was 4 of us in the project. Next slide. That's some of the images that we were coming across. So there's quite a good selection of everyday life and more unique objects. Next slide. As we were undertaking the project, the actual negative boxes were housed in a compactus away from the local studies room, and it was in sort of fairly good condition. So while we weren't sort of stopping in deterioration, it was still an at-risk location. So we had to work out what we were going to do next for the preservation of the actual negatives. Next slide. So we did a preservation needs assessment on the pictorial negative collection, given that the risk of no action meant that we could possibly lose the collection as a whole. We engaged a conservator who undertook an acetate survey to determine whereabouts our items were on the deterioration pathway, and the recommendations that she actually gave us on the sort of options we had for cold storage. And so we were undertaking a packaging project, which is still underway, for preparing negatives so that they could be frozen, which was the only option for prolonging the life of the acetate negatives. Next slide. And there we have all of the acetate negatives in various stages of deterioration, some worse than others, and we were lucky to have every type of deterioration there was for acetate negatives. So the acetate survey was able to tell us on a scale of 0.5 to 3 where our collection was sitting, and most of them, about 80%, were sort of in the middle. 20% was at the 0.5 end, and fortunately we had none at the worst end, which was the 3. So that was good assessment for us to be able to work out the way forward. So next slide. So what we decided, there was options to store offsite or to actually acquire a freezer. Offsite was considered but rejected because it was too far away for us to actually logistically be able to do anything. It was much more practical to have a freezer. So we purchased from AG Equipment, and these are the features that are absolute must if you're going to do a freezing of any negatives. It just makes it easier to maintain. So it came in at just under $3,000. So that was quite useful. We're still doing the project at the moment. Next slide. One of the things that delays that kind of packing of items is temperature and relative humidity, and the optimum is 20 degrees temperature and less than 50% for the relative humidity. So as easy as that might sound, it was actually quite difficult depending on the day that you're trying to pack, and the conditions in the local studies room varied from day to day. So we're sort of picking our best times to do it. So that's sort of slowing us down a little bit as well. Next slide. Also, we had to acquire specific supplies to do the project. The negative boxes had to be double bagged in moisture barrier bags, which then had to have humidity indicator cards on them to monitor how they were travelling in the freezer. Freezer tape to hold them all together, because we were using coffee pod bags, believe it or not, to actually find the double barrier bags that we could use. So we had to adapt those for our own use. Tissue paper to pack out the negative boxes, and various other things to identify them so that we could retrieve them. Next slide. And this is us in the early stages of putting those together. We did actually and still put the boxes into smaller archive boxes so that they're easier to move around. And next slide. That's us putting negatives, so the boxes, into the freezer. It's located in the basement of our building, so it's close to us, but we still have to go and monitor sort of every now and again to make sure it's all still plugged in, still working, and not crowded out with other items in the garage. And as I say, the project is still underway. So we've got 283 boxes in total of negatives. We actually digitised 4,700 of a potential 12,500 negatives. So it was a fairly big collection. And we're still going, and with the option we have now of them being in the freezer, we can retrieve them if we need to go back and rescan or select other items. Next slide. The aim of it all is to actually get them onto our local history database, which is Recollect, and we have other items in our local studies collection on that system. So we'll actually be putting them up as a collection, but we're not quite there yet. So we'll probably be looking sometime later this year to finish the freezing packaging and concentrate then on getting some information and photographs up onto the database to share with our audience, as well as the Historical Society as well. So it's a good outcome for making them available and then maintaining the acetate negs for the future. So next slide. If anybody's actually interested in talking to me about that, I haven't put my details there, but I will put them up later for you to contact me. It's been a very labour intensive and a very long process, so I'm happy to talk to anybody in a similar situation or wanting just to know more about the process. So I'm happy to talk to anybody about that. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Helen. We're running a little bit behind time, so we're just going to move straight along to our next presenter, who is Nico van der Schip, and he's from Toowoomba Regional Library in Queensland. Nico, if you can pop on your video, please. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Nicole. And hi, everybody. Yes, Nico here from Toowoomba, which is Kayabel and Jarowa country. Today, I would just like to share our experience that we had in implementing or developing and implementing a counter disaster plan or a CDP, just so I don't have to say counter disaster plan 20 times today. So if we can move on to the next slide. I'd like to start with just explaining quickly our structure of our collections, our local history collections. So we've basically got 3 types of collections. The first is our preservation collection. That's in climate controlled storage and on-site access in the Toowoomba City Library, where our local history library is located. The second is our reference collection, or rather local history reference collection. We've got 2 of those. One is also in Toowoomba at our local history library. The other is at one of our library branches, which is in Oakey. Now, these collections are able to, or should, or will become able to travel between branches, but still won't be for loan. But it's just so that we can send them out to some of our other, we've got 13 branches in total, just so those items can travel a little bit. And then thirdly is our hopefully soon to be for loan branch collections. Still a bit of a work in progress, but all the other branches have small little collections, and we're hoping to make those ones for loan soon. So when it comes to the counter disaster plan, it's obviously the preservation collection that's our main concern. Next slide, please. So I just want to start with mentioning some of the sources that we used for developing the counter disaster plan. So the first one was ALIA. ALIA's got a guide as well as a template, and we did find the guide very useful. It provides all the disaster planning classifications and terminology and so on. The main thing there is the four stages of disaster planning, which is prevention, preparedness, response, and recovery. We use those 4 stages really as the framework for our plans and our procedures. ALIA's also got a template, but we didn't find that one as useful as we found the guide. On to the next slide. The second source was State Library Queensland. In this case, we did find the template very useful. We still did our own thing, but the template did give us a lot of ideas for structure and for content. It does have some rather detailed response and recovery procedures, instructions in there, and it's a Word file, so it's easy to adapt. And then also State Library has a Caring for Your Collections webpage with just a lot of information there that we also found useful. And then on the next slide, another source we used was a toolkit developed by Flinders University, Disaster Resilience Toolkit, and that had good info on risk assessments, what types of risks there might be to the collection. We used that as a basis, but we ended up using the in-house council risk matrix to actually do our scoring. We also made use of our council's records department. They were working on their counter disaster plan, so we could work together. The lights have just gone out here. So we could copy some of their procedures also. That was a bit more local. And then also just looked for more examples online. So other libraries, counter disaster plans that we could find online, we just basically checked in with those ones also. All right, so on the next slide, what we came up with was we decided to split this plan into 3 documents, because why would we have one if we can have 3? The real reason was that we wanted to have an overarching plan. The plan ideally would be a branch procedure and would be applicable to all library collections and locations. And the plan gives us the framework. It tells us how to do the disaster procedures, and also that each location should have their own procedures. So an overarching plan or framework, and then 2 procedures. So we split the procedures into 2 parts. The first is we call the prevention and preparedness procedure, which I know is very creative. So as the name suggests, that covers the first 2 stages of disaster planning, the before, and then the second procedure is the during and after, which we call the response and recovery procedure. The main reason for that was that our response and recovery procedure could be our document in hand. So when things go wrong, we've got a document that we can go to, which isn't cluttered with risk assessments and more overarching plan details, etc. So it works well, as that procedure that we will have in hand is really limited to only the things that's of importance at that moment. All right, and then on to the last slide, just some general comments on that. So first up, the counter disaster plan only applies to physical collections. In this case, still only the local history collection, but only physical collection. So everything else, we've just thought we'll leave that as someone else's problem. So our digital items is on council's records management system, and they've got their procedures there. Facilities are property services problem, and the pieces and equipment will be ICTs. So really only physical collections that we focused on. Our salvage priority list, just a note there. So we've got a priority list, and we're really focusing on the unique and the rare items, items relevant to our collection. We're not that concerned with the value as such. It's more the rarity that we find important. Another thing was the networking opportunity that this gave us. So really a good opportunity to work with other sections of council, property services, records, and so on, just to raise our profile a little bit, remind people that we actually exist. So that was good. And then the last one, just a note on staff training. We split that basically into three different groups, where all staff are aware that we've got this plan in place, but they don't know much more than that. Then we have a bigger counter disaster team, so people that should be on site more often and so on, and they know a little bit more, so really just what to do initially. And then the third group is our local history staff that knows the ins and the outs, and we will basically take over from the other staff as soon as we can. So yeah, that's very brief. That's what we did. It wasn't too painful, to be honest. A lot of good resources out there that we can that we could use. So yeah, thanks everyone. I'll hand it back to Nicole.
Thanks, Nico. Very important. Our last lightning talker today is Simone Sharp. Simone, could I get you to come put your video on? Simone is from Stonington History Centre in Victoria, and she's going to be talking to us about training new staff in local history skills. Thanks, Simone.
Thanks, Nicole. Okay, I'll just run through this relatively quickly. This came up when I had experience of training a library staff member in working with us with our local history collection last year, but it can also apply to work placement students. So people who already have a background in libraries, which is kind of what I've pitched that at. But before I go any further, I'd just like to acknowledge that at Malvern, where I am today, Malvern in Victoria, we are on the lands of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung peoples of the East Kulin Nations. Next, please. So these are the things I'm just going to cover today. An overview of the collection and the service. Who are your customers? The top 5 questions from customers, search tips, access use conditions, assistance from a distance, as I've called it. If not your collection, then who and where, and also customer service, things to be thinking of with your new staff, I guess. Okay, next. So an overview, when you're introducing new staff to the collection, what makes your collection special, unique, and or valuable, and what makes it different from the public library, basically. Just some things to reflect on. Next. So your customers, who are your customers? And again, how are they different from the library's customers? So, there we go. Internal customers, other departments of council, perhaps, and external, the general public, researchers who are a little more specific with their needs, legal, I've got here, including police, lawyers, private detectives. We've had all of those groups of people as customers here at the History Centre, including, like, for instance, with private detectives, could be people helping someone who's been adopted or fostered, trying to reconnect with their family of origin, and how you can help them. So they have specific needs, specific privacy concerns that you might need to negotiate with them. And then, of course, the media. We get questions from the media from time to time, and it's how much we're able to help them ourselves versus how much we have to hand that off to council's comms and media departments. Okay, next. So what are the top 5 questions that, most common questions that your customers are likely to ask? So I've got here, think about the questions you would like your staff to be able to answer if you're not there. Say you're at lunch, say you're in a meeting, say you're on the phone, or obviously on leave. But what would you like your staff to know? So empower your staff to be able to answer some of those questions, and even to answer them when you're there, so that you're not having to step in all the time. Next. Search tips. So what are the search tips and tricks to assist your staff in helping find material for customers? That could be finding aids. Here at the History Centre, we have location details on the catalogue. We use a SPIDIS catalogue, but the general public can't see those locations. So it's helping staff to find the location details on the catalogue. And in our instance, that means that staff need to have staff access to SPIDIS, to the SPIDIS catalogue. So even if they're just being a temporary fill-in, if they're work placement students, then that's something that might need to be negotiated with your IT department. And acronyms or codes for types of materials or storage locations. We have an old Malvern Council area collection divided into 3 groups. So MP stands for Malvern Photos, MH stands for Malvern History Material, and MB stands for Malvern Building Plans. Again, helping your staff know what they mean really upfront, really early, helps them to understand what it is perhaps somebody's requesting and where things might be located. Okay, next. Access and use conditions, again, fairly self-explanatory, but these include access to the facility, the building, the room, wherever your collection is, as well as to the collection itself. So what are your open and closing times? Are pre-booked appointments recommended, necessary, not needed, pre-ordered materials? if something's stored off-site or somewhere where only you have the key, for instance, as opposed to, you know, the staff member that's helping you. Copyright, fairly obviously, usage licenses, fragile materials, digital copies, fees and charges, technologies and formats. Now that I've got here is something that you might need to go over with your new staff. How to use the microfiche readers, how to use the CD-ROMs. Some of you may be familiar with the good old Digger CD-ROM genealogy collection. We've got one computer that is still able to use those, so it's instructing your staff in how to use those so that they can help customers. Okay, next. What I've called here assistance from a distance. One of the things that we help customers with over the phone is how to navigate the catalogue, and that's over the phone and also via email. So we might have a customer ring up and say, I'd like photos of Chapel Street, which is our famous retail strip in Prahran, which is part of the Stonnington area. We have hundreds. We can help them to narrow down if they want a photo of the town hall or if they're after a particular shop or a particular section. But as much as we're just as likely to say, how about, or have you searched the catalogue? We ask them if they have. If not, this is how you search the catalogue. And we help them to navigate right from the start. So it could be, okay, Google the Stonnington History Centre. Once you get to that page, click on this link and we'll help them every step of the way. So if you can help your staff to do that over the phone, that's a big help for customers as well. Next, please. Where else? So if we don't have something in our collection that the customer is interested in, could they be better off going to another council department, say for building plans that we don't have? Historical societies, different historical societies have different collections or abilities to help, and state and national collections, obviously. Okay, next. Key resources, your website, databases, postal directories and rate books. Explain the difference, show your staff the difference, maps and subdivision plans, Trove, including search tips like, you know, quote marks, the genealogy records, local history books, walk books, things like that. Do you have them? Are they for sale? And Aboriginal, Indigenous, traditional owners, what is the correct term in your area, and where can you help people find names and other resources? Next. This is a page that I've done of some Indigenous resources here. So obviously, first place, hopefully your council, your local council, or the national libraries, state libraries have a correct acknowledgement. You can always refer to that if nothing else. We have, well, there's the AATSIS map that I think it was Jeffrey showed us earlier. And we've got a great map from actually on SBS on the names of the country. So Melbourne is Naarm. And then the Aboriginal Cultural Heritage Register and Information System. It's only in Victoria at the moment, but it's really helpful to, you can just type in an address and it gives you the traditional lands that you're on, that house is on, that building is on. It's really helpful in council because we have, across Stonnington, we have a couple of Indigenous groups in our area. And lastly, just the summary, just emphasize customer service, help your staff to help customers. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Simone. So that now brings us to the end of the Wider Local Studies seminar. thank you to all the presenters for the ideas that they've raised over the last 2 days. We certainly cover a lot of ground. So everyone will be sent a brief evaluation survey via email. So please take the time to fill this in. It includes the opportunity to put your name forward to be part of the planning committee for future seminars. So I really encourage anyone who's interested to put yourself forward to help out. We have one more kind of informal session tomorrow, which just gives us the opportunity to get together informally. It won't be recorded, to kind of debrief and digest some of the topics that have been raised over the last couple of days. The link to that, I think my colleague Julie is going to put in the chat. If she hasn't already, she's pretty organized. And so, yeah, I hope to see everyone tomorrow. And I just want to sign off by saying a huge thank you to all the presenters again, and to everyone who participated for your curiosity and your input and your insightful comments. And a big thank you to the planning committee members. We're a small but mighty team, and I especially just want to mention Ellen Forsyth from the State Library of New South Wales. So yeah, thank you again, everyone. I think it was a really successful seminar, and I'm sure everyone got a lot out of it. So we'll see you soon.